Imagine this. You're at a party, a work meeting, or just walking down the street. Someone approaches you with a radiant smile, greets you with contagious enthusiasm, and says, "Hi, so great to see you." You smile back. Your brain starts working at 1,000 miles per hour. You search every mental file, but nothing. There's an absolute void where their name should be. You feel terrible. You feel like you're rude, disinterested, or worse, that your memory is starting to fail in a worrying way. How is it possible to forget someone in 5 seconds? If this has happened to you, and I know it has because it happens to me too, today I want to take a weight off your shoulders. You're not absent-minded by choice. You're not insensitive. In fact, science tells us that forgetting names is one of the most common memory failures in human beings. And it has a fascinating psychological and neurological explanation. Today we're not only going to understand why your brain decides to erase that crucial piece of data, we're going to discover what it says about the way you process the world. If this kind of depth matters to you, subscribe to this channel. We explore the psychology behind how we think, feel, and connect. Let's get into it. We often think memory works like a video recorder. You see something, hear it, and it gets saved to a hard drive. But the reality is that human memory is much more like an extremely selective art curator who is also sometimes a little stressed. The forgetting of names has a technical connection in psychology. It relates to what researchers call the next-in-line effect. Have you noticed that most of the time you forget the name right after the person introduces themselves? This happens because while the other person is saying, "Hi, I'm Julian," you're not listening. Not because you're a bad person, because your brain is busy preparing your own introduction. You're thinking about how you're going to greet them, whether you have something in your teeth,
Whether your handshake will be too firm or too limp, whether you look approachable enough. We're so focused on social performance that the other person's name bounces off our auditory cortex and gets lost before it ever reaches the hippocampus, which is where long-term memories are manufactured. You didn't forget the name. Technically, it never entered your system. If that just made something click, hit the like button. Let's keep going. To understand this deeper, we need to dive into the neuroscience of language. Proper names are, from a biological standpoint, arbitrary information. If I tell you I met a man who is a baker, your brain immediately visualizes bread, feels the smell of flour, remembers a bakery. The concept baker is connected to thousands of neural networks of meaning. But if I tell you that man's last name is Baker, that name has no logical connection to him. It's just a label glued on with very weak adhesive. In psychology, there's a famous experiment called the Baker/Baker paradox. Researchers discovered that it's much easier to remember that someone is a baker, the profession, than to remember that their last name is Baker. When you think about the profession, your brain activates a semantic network. Images, smells, experiences, textures, memories of bread. When you think about the name, it's an isolated word. There are no hooks to hang that information on. No neural network lights up. No associations fire. It's just a sound floating in the void. This is why you can remember that someone works in finance, has 2 kids, loves hiking, and drives a red car, but you cannot for the life of you remember their name. Everything else had meaning. The name had none. We also have something called working memory. Think of it as a nightstand where only a couple of things fit at a time. When someone introduces themselves, the ambient noise, your own social anxiety, the pressure of the interaction, the visual processing of their face, their body language, Your own body language?
all of that fills the nightstand instantly. The name is the first thing that falls off the edge. And here's what makes it worse. The more you care about making a good impression, the more cognitive resources you divert to self-monitoring, and the fewer resources remain for encoding their name. The people who forget names most often aren't the ones who don't care. They're the ones who care too much. Subscribe right now, because what comes next are the tools that actually fix this. Now that we've accepted we're not bad people, we can be strategic. Here are 3 psychological tools to make names stick. Tool 1. Say it out loud immediately. The moment you hear the name, use it. "Nice to meet you, Julian." It's not enough to think it. By pronouncing it, You're forcing your brain to process the information through motor and auditory pathways simultaneously, creating a much deeper memory trace. Neuroscience calls this the production effect. Words you speak aloud are remembered significantly better than words you only hear. You're essentially writing the name twice in your brain instead of once. Tool 2. Create an absurd visual association. Remember that the name is an empty label? We're going to fill it. If you meet a rose, don't just think of her face. Imagine her holding a giant electric blue rose the size of a surfboard. The more absurd the image, the easier it is for your brain to retrieve it. What you're doing is converting abstract data into a vivid mental image. You're giving the name hooks, neural network connections, semantic weight. You're turning Baker the label into Baker the man covered in flour juggling baguettes. And that, your brain will never forget. Tool 3. Ask how it's spelled. If the name is unusual, or even if it isn't, ask how do you spell that? While the person explains, visualize the letters written across their forehead.
This activates the visual cortex and buys you those crucial extra seconds for the name to transfer from short-term to long-term memory. You're not being nosy, you're being strategic. And most people are actually flattered when you ask about the spelling of their name. It signals that you care enough to get it right. Now let's talk about the guilt, because this is where most people get stuck. Many people feel that forgetting a name is a sign of disrespect. And that guilt generates anxiety, which makes you forget the next name even faster. It's a vicious cycle. The anxiety of, I can't believe I forgot their name again, consumes the exact cognitive resources you need to encode the next name. Guilt doesn't improve memory, it destroys it. The next time you forget a name, instead of punishing yourself, try this thought. My brain was so interested in connecting with this person and being present that it didn't have room for the name label. I'm a social being, not a database. Accepting our vulnerability makes us more human. In fact, admitting honestly and warmly that you forgot a name can create a deeper connection than pretending you know it. There's a beautiful honesty in saying, I'm so sorry, I was enjoying our conversation so much that your name slipped away for a moment. Would you tell me again? That's not weakness, that's emotional authority. One more thing that almost nobody mentions. Introverts and highly sensitive people tend to forget names more frequently. Not because their memory is worse, because their brains are processing more data simultaneously. While an extrovert at a party might be in cruise mode, an introvert's brain is analyzing tone of voice, body language, emotional undercurrents, the energy of the room, potential exit routes, and whether the other person actually wants to be talking to them. All of that processing leaves almost no bandwidth for a single arbitrary label.
If you're someone who forgets names constantly but remembers conversations in extraordinary detail, remembers how people made you feel, remembers the exact moment the energy in a room shifted, that's not a memory problem. That's a processing priority. Your brain chose depth over labels, and that's a feature, not a bug. In summary, forgetting names is not a sign that you're inconsiderate or that your mind is failing. It's simply proof of how our cognitive architecture works. We prefer meaning over empty labels, and sometimes our own presence plays a trick on us. Your brain is not broken. It's just extraordinarily busy being human. If this changed how you see your memory, subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who always forgets names and feels terrible about it. Tell us in the comments, what's the most embarrassing name forgetting moment you've survived? See you in the next one.